Hello everyone, and welcome back to Raid Shadow Legends. We'll be doing some more summons this video. At the time of this recording, there's a progressive chance and a summon event, so I decided to make some summons. And this time I'll be using my higher tier shards, because I really want the rewards from this summon event. So, let's cross our fingers and hope we get some good champions. Ooh. Legendary on the first draw. Very nice. Although I have this champion already. However, that only means Faction Guardian. So yeah, it's still pretty nice. And you know, I got to see the animation, so nice. Taking a second to... There it goes. Okay, now we got Ragash of the Skinwalkers. And he is awesome looking. Let's see what he can do. Tiger's Great Claws. One enemy 2 times. Place a 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns. Alright. Next we have Fur Typhoon. Attacks all enemies. 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on each enemy for 2 turns before attacking. Also has a 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn after attacking. Very useful. And now we have Felid Fleetness. Places a 25% strengthen buff and a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also places a perfect fail buff on this champion for 2 turns. Very, very nice. Ascension skill is a passive Art of Stealth. At the start of each turn, places a perfect veil buff for 1 turn on the ally with the highest attack. Inflicts 20% more damage against targets whose defense is lower than his... I got tongue twisted there, I am so sorry. Inflicts 20% more damage against targets whose defense is lower than his champion's defense. Alright. Aura skill increases ally defense in all battles by 30%. First 2 sacred shards and 2 legendaries. Today's my lucky day. Of course I say that, and then I don't get a legendary the 3rd time. Oh, I should keep my mouth shut. But anyway, we now got Woozgar of the Ogren tribes. Quite a cool looking fella. Restorative Violence. Attacks 1 enemy 4 times. Wow, that's great. For Fire Knight. Each hit heals the ally with the lowest HP by 2% of this champion's max HP. That's already... Oh wow, that's already a great primary skill. Shaman's Gift. Heals all allies by 10% of this champion's max HP. Also places a counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns. And now Tusked Protection. Places a 30% reflect damage buff and a shield buff equal to 20% this champion's max HP on all allies for 2 turns. I couldn't say it for some reason, I don't know why. Ascension skills of passive. Ogryn Restoration. Restores destroyed max HP when the champion heals themselves or an ally. The amount of HP restored is equal to 30% of the heal. Alright. So... yeah, of not quite a legendary, but kinda should be with how useful those skills are. Okay, now... next shard. Another epic. Nice. Sandlash Survivor of the Orcs. Cool design. Wow. Sorry, but I just heard sound effects with that animation with the sword. I am not used to that. Wow. Smell weakness. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Ascension skill. Has a 30% chance of placing a provoke debuff on the target for 1 turn if this champion has no debuffs. Heals by 50% of the damage inflicted if the champion is under any debuff. Alright. Useful. Endless Sands. Attacks all enemies. Increases the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn. Increases the duration of all ally buffs for 1 turn. Very, very nice. Born Survivor passive. Places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies for 2 turns. When an ally's HP drops below 50%, also places a block damage buff on this champion for 1 turn. Wow. Very useful. And increase or skill increases ally defense in all battles by 25%. Very nice. Whoa, big fella. Now we got Siege Hulk of the Ogryn tribes. He is awesome looking. Battering Ram. Attacks one enemy. Decreases the target's turn meter by 15% if the target is under a decreased defense debuff or a decreased speed debuff. Thrashing Fit. Places a 50% increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns. That attacks all enemies. Has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Siege Breaker. Places a 30% increased critical rate buff and a 30% increased critical damage buff on this champion for 2 turns, then attacks one enemy. The Ascension skill also has a 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff on the target for 2 turns. Nice. Aura skill increases ally critical rate in Doom Tower battles by 24%. Quite nice. Alright, we have Ugo of the Ogryn tribes. She's cool looking. Black Hand attacks one enemy. 35% chance of placing a leech debuff for 2 turns. The chance increases by 5% for each alive ally. Cool. Maelstrom Rack attacks all enemies. 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Also has a 50% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. The chance of placing the block buffs debuff increases by 5% for each alive enemy. Wait. Oh, yes, sorry, I misread that earlier. It's an enemy, not ally, sorry. Ugo's Brew removes all heal reduction debuffs from all allies, then removes 1 random debuff from all allies, then heals all allies by 20% its champion's max HP. If all allies are dead, revives them with a 50% HP and then fills their turn meters by 50% instead. Cool. Ascension skills of passive. Final Spite places a 30% increased speed buff and a block damage buff on this champion for 1 turn whenever this champion's last living ally is killed. Very nice. Alright, we now have Mistress of Hymns, or Heims. Cool design. Bolstering Blow. 1 enemy heals the ally with the lowest HP by 15% of the damage inflicted. Nice. Song of Triumph attacks 1 enemy. Places a 15% continuous heal buff on the 2 allies with the lowest HP for 2 turns if its attack is critical. Alright. Hymn of Rebirth revives 2 random allies with 50% HP. The Ascension skill also places a Veil buff on them for 1 turn. Sorry. Very nice. Or skill increases ally defense in all battles by 25%. A Reviver. Very nice. My last Sacred Shard. Legendary? Crud. Another Siege Hulk. Alright. Alright. I'm gonna use up my Primal Shards. I have never used one yet, so this is my first time. Darn it. Yeah. I'll come back to you when I find a new champion. Okay, 2nd shard, and I got a legendary, wow. Nice. We got Strategos Islin of the High Elves. There's a train coming by, so sorry about that. Anyway. Yeah. His design is sick. One of my favorites, absolutely. Especially the helmet. My goodness. Let's see what he can do. 2 Slash. Attacks 1 enemy 2 times. 80% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. The chance of placing the block buffs debuff for 2 turns. The chance of placing the block buffs debuff for 2 turns increases by 5% for each alive ally. Each hit has a 35% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. When counter-attacking, the chance increases by 50%. Alright. Hindrance. Attacks all enemies before attacking has a 75% chance of decreasing the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn. Cool. Has a 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Alright, next we have Flawless Stratagem. Places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. And places a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also places a counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns. Then places a shield buff on this champion for 2 turns. The value of the shield is proportional to the champion's defense. Alright. Protect the troops passive. Whenever this champion is attacked, heals themselves by 1% for each 500 defense of this champion. The champion has, Heals all other allies under ally protection buffs placed by this champion by 30% of this skill's initial heal. Very, very, very nice. Aura skill increases ally accuracy in all battles by 60. It's also his ascension skill. A very awesome looking and very helpful champion. Nice. Alright, we got Fennex of the Sacred Order. Who seems like quite a charming fellow. Put down, attacks one enemy, places an extra hit if the target has any debuffs. Ascension skill, enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived. Useful. Stern Partner. Attacks all enemies. Has a 75% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. And a block active skills debuff for 1 turn if this skill does not place an block buffs debuff. Decreases bomb detonation countdowns by 1 turn when Talia is on the same team. Cool. And Sow Feebleness. One enemy, 60% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Okay, so quite cool. Okay, I actually got all the rewards from the event that I wanted, so alright, I got the champions I wanted. So, just in case I, don't get the fusion champion, I'm gonna read, the descriptions of the 2 champions I just got. So first, of the 2, we have Garnox Blackthorn of the Skinwalkers, and he looks awesome. And that's a great shield. Knee Smasher attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Means to an End places a 50% ally protection buff. Also places the counterattack buff in this champion for 2 turns. Alright, now Bullish Fighter attacks all enemies. 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. This debuff cannot be resisted. If this champion's defense is lower than the targets. Places a 30% reflect damage buff on all allies for 2 turns. Ascension skills are passive. Loathe Pariah. Whenever an enemy attacks an ally under ally protection buff, this has a 15% chance of placing a provoke debuff on the attacker for 1 turn. Alright. Increases ally defense infection crypts by 30% is the aura. Very nice. A very take the damage kind of character. Okay, now we got Glensage Kythril of the Sylvan Watchers. Headcrack attacks one enemy. Has a 30% chance of placing a 25% decreased accuracy debuff for 2 turns. Wound Splitter. I keep thinking it's Splitter. Wound Spiller Herbs. Attacks all enemies. Has a 50% chance of placing a 100% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns. Useful. And Grace of the Glen. Places a block debuffs buff on all allies for 1 turn. The Ascension skill also fills the turn meters of all allies by 15%. Very cool champions.
Okay, I actually managed to get enough cursed remnants from the cursed city. So yeah, in this video I'll also do my very first remnant summon. Let's see what that looks like. Alright.
We got Marauka of the Orcs. I love her design. Tarfield of Affliction. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each has a 15% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Handy. Badlands Witchery. Removes all debuffs from the target ally, then heals them by 50% their max HP. Sorry, I couldn't say it for some reason. HP. Return from the slime. Places a Revive on Death buff on all allies for 2 turns. Springy. Ascension skills are passive. Each time this champion is hit, increases the defense by 2.5%. Stacks up to 20%. Resets each round. Okay. Pretty cool. Pretty helpful. And with that, I'm going to end the episode here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Catch you later.